Welcome everyone to our second part of Washington Gas Exposed. So this is a three-part series that the Chesapeake Climate Action Network is putting on to help educate people about what Washington gas actually is, what methane gas is, and how it impacts you, your wallet, the planet, your health. And tonight's session is co-sponsored by We Power DC and Sunrise DC. So folks from all three organizations will be sharing about how utilities profit off of raising your bills. So, um, if folks do have questions as we're presenting, that's great. We're going to have time at the end for you to ask any of your questions and just for us to chat a bit. And so if you do have questions, please save them to the end. Also, feel free to use the chat as we're going along, and we'll do our best to answer those questions there, but anything more complicated, really encourage folks to stay to the end to ask questions. So let us get started with how utilities profit off raising your bills. First, to introduce your presenters for tonight. So my name is Claire Mills. I'm the DC Campaigns Manager at the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. We are a regional nonprofit that works to promote climate stability in the Chesapeake region. I lead our DC team, and we also do work in Maryland and Virginia and at the regional and federal levels. Here in DC, most of our work is focused on moving the district beyond methane gas and otherwise promoting climate stability. I'm going to pass it over to Kevin with We Power DC.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Kevin. I am with We Power DC, been organizing for almost a year now. And yeah, We Power DC is an organization that is basically advocating for the municipalization of our electric utility, PEPCO. And so we do that through community building, getting to know people, and then ultimately trying to pass legislation that will do that. And I'll pass it over to Harrison, who's also with Power.
Hi, everyone. I'm Harrison Powers. I also work with We Power DC. That's the gist of it. We are just pushing for a government-owned, city-owned, cleaner grid to distribute electricity to the DC residents and businesses. I'll pass it over to Justin from Sunrise.
Hi, everyone. I'm Justin, and I'm with Sunrise DC. We are a youth organization fighting for collective liberation in the face of the climate crisis. Our theory of change involves a three-pronged approach of political power, disruptive action, and mutual aid.
All right, awesome. So one more time, like I said, for folks that just joined, welcome. This is the second part of our Washington Gas Exposed series. The first part covered climate, and if you missed it, we have a recording that we'll follow up with in our follow-up email, as well as a recording of tonight's session, and all the information you need to follow up with CCAN, We Power, Sunrise, and otherwise take action as we cover things. If folks have questions, we will have time at the end. And with no further ado, let's get it started. I'll pass it over to Justin.
So first off, why do utilities matter? The reality is, we all know that fossil fuels are relics of the past. They are dirty, both for our planet and your health, and they are expensive, as green technologies are now increasingly cheaper. Utility companies want to keep you locked into fossil fuels in order to keep their profits running and you paying more. They are holding on to a bygone era, exploiting all of us and stopping us from moving into a clean energy future. And they use a variety of methods to do this, including public propaganda and expensive infrastructure investments. So let's take a quick look at that first one first. So gas has historically had a strong PR image of power and reliability. And you may have heard of the phrase cooking with gas. This is an idiom popularized by celebrity entertainer Bob Hope in the 1930s. It was given to him by American Gas Association executive Dee Colgate. However, as this brand image becomes increasingly untrue, the gas industry continues to weaponize this nostalgic reputation to desperately attempt to maintain popularity. They've long since run ads not for any individual company, but to try to maintain their romantic cultural cachet. More recently, they've been paying influencers to make sponsored posts about cooking with gas. As you will see, the claims here in this Instagram post about gas being able to cook food faster and giving more control are simply no longer true. And why do they do this? They want you to keep paying for gas. Only 2% of residential gas usage is for cooking. But it's a lot easier to upsell homeowners and landlords on gas heating when you already have gas lines for stoves. They're using their remaining soft power to hide better alternatives and keep us stuck in a fossil fuel past. In addition to using soft power, they are also pushing for mass infrastructure projects to materially lock us into this past. To talk about that, we first have Kevin from WePower DC.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. So yeah, I'll talk through a little bit about the power system, and get into some of the investor-owned details about investor-owned utilities. So yeah, our power system, as you can see here, in general, it kind of goes from generation, which is where all the power is produced, the actual plants, the power plants, to transmission, and this is sort of the very long, high voltage lines that sort of get you from generation closer to the actual places where people live and use the power. And so you have the transmission lines, very, very high voltage, as I mentioned, and that takes you down to the distribution part of the power system. And then this distribution part, the voltage comes down. You often have like 2,000 electric distribution utilities around the country that are, using power that comes from these transmission lines. And they are the ones that ultimately distribute to customers, 145 million customers, all different kinds of customers from, very, very large customers to like residents, businesses, you name it, and they'll do it. Let's go to the next slide. So yeah, I think as I mentioned, generation, right, turns resources into energy. That could be anything from coal, gas, nuclear, hydro, solar, wind, many other things. And then transmission, as I said, sends large amounts of energy from the generation site. These are often like large interstate pipelines, long distance high voltage wires. And then we get to the distribution stage, which is where the energy is actually sent directly to you as a customer. And this is kind of where Pepco comes in. So Pepco, as our electric utility, they own, whether it's the below ground or the overhead wires, and they're the ones responsible for distributing this power for 320,000 customers all across the district. Washington Gas is our gas utility, and they own about 1,200 miles of pipeline in DC, meeting the needs of about close to 150,000 residential customers. Yeah, so just to talk a little bit more about generation for context, oftentimes generation is done in a wholesale market. And so like you might have like very large power plants, whether that's solar, wind, or fossil fuels, and they'll bid into these different markets, different areas. And this is where like a lot of distribution utilities sort of source their power from at a very high level. And so okay, I was just going to mention, we're in the PJM section. That is our wholesale market. And then, yeah, once you sort of go to the distribution level, yeah, you'll notice there's all different kinds of distribution utilities. Some are much larger in terms of the size that they serve, and some are much smaller. It's really based on population. Pepco is located, you can barely see it here because it serves a very small area relative to a lot of other distribution utilities. For example, there's some utilities out in, say, like Colorado or Wyoming, and because there's very few people, you have one utility that serves like a very large area. Pepco is generally the opposite because we're in a city. But you'll notice here that there's many, many, many different distribution utilities all across the country. Cool. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about regulated monopolies. And I think this is where the importance of Pepco and how it serves its shareholders comes in. So because it doesn't make sense it doesn't make sense to have like multiple sets of wires. Local and state governments will often grant like a monopoly to a distribution company, right? So like, for example, with Pepco, they own the lines. And it doesn't make sense to like have competing companies build other lines. And so the government, it's basically like a natural monopoly. And when state governments, when they grant that monopoly, it's overseen by usually what's called the Public Service Commission. So DC has a Public Service Commission. And this Public Service Commission is responsible for conducting oversight and price management and basically ensuring that, the monopoly company does not abuse its power. And so essentially the deal then is if you are the utility, you work with the Public Service Commission to agree on electric rates that guarantee you a certain level of profit on whatever investments and spending that you get approved. And in return, citizens and consumers are guaranteed service at a reasonable cost. And I think this is the in theory of regulated monopolies, but in practice, that's often not how it works. So we go to the next slide. Yeah. So specifically in the case of investor-owned utilities, a lot of times what happens, and this is what has happened in DC, is the monopoly utility, which is owned by investors who are not in DC. They're just rich people who own shares. They capture the Public Service Commission, and so they are essentially able to dictate to the Public Service Commission what their rates should be. And because shareholders care the most about rising share prices, dividends, right? They want to make money off of their investments. Bondholders obviously also want a return on investment. And citizens and consumers are like neither of these. So we see here, right, that despite the in theory that the Public Service Commission should help or should work with the utility and ensure that they don't abuse their power. Oftentimes, investor-owned utilities capture the Public Service Commission and they start asking to make very large investments, such as large centralized fossil fuel projects, because then they have an excuse to raise rates. They have an excuse to make more profit for their shareholders, even though these projects are not necessarily good for the community. I mean, in this case, they're definitely not good for the community. But even if we're not talking about fossil fuel projects, in general, the fact is that there is no oversight. There is no true input from the community, and the profits are all extracted out. And they're all given to the shareholders. And utilities often use this as an excuse to say, well, this is how we raise more money because we need to compete in capital markets. But the reality is that they are selling a deal to investors saying you get guaranteed profit. And then they turn to the PSC saying you need to raise rates so that we can meet these profit levels, regardless of whether those investments or plans actually help the people who live there. And I think, with that, I will pass it over to Claire to talk about our gas utility.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. That's super helpful. So Kevin talked a lot about the way investor-owned utilities work and cited a lot of examples from Pepco. Our gas utility, Washington Gas, works exactly the same. This is basically how investor-owned utilities work, whether they're selling electricity or gas. Washington Gas is owned by a parent company, AltaGas, the same way Pepco is owned by a parent company, Exelon. And what Kevin was just talking about at the end is this idea that utilities are incentivized to invest in these big programs and build out expensive programs to make money. So I'm going to talk through what an example of that looks like directly here in DC. So first, DC's gas system is old and a lot of the pipes are leaking methane. This is not unique to DC. This is something that's common across the whole East Coast where we have a lot of old methane gas systems. And just to clarify on that, a lot of folks might, know the term natural gas. And at CCAN, we always refer to it as methane gas because the vast majority, 97% of natural gas is methane. There's a couple other things in there as well, but natural gas is a greenwashing term by the industry to make it sound like it's all good, when actually methane is a problem. So that's why we call it methane gas. But if you're used to natural gas, that's what I'm talking about. So we know that there's a problem. Gas leaks are a problem and we want to address them. But if we do enormous investment into our gas system, then we're committing to continuing to use the system, which pumps fossil fuels through our city. And so that's putting in a bunch of money to something that ultimately we need to transition away from in, really as soon as possible. but within the next couple of decades to meet our clean energy goals in the district. So, Washington Gas does two different things to maintain that leaking old gas system. One is regular repair. Regular repair is supposed to address actively leaking pipes. So if someone reports a gas leak, Washington Gas goes out and sees, yes, this pipe's leaking. They evaluate how big is the leak. And depending on how big it is, they have different requirements of how fast they're required to repair it. There's also a bunch of leaks that are detectable, but they're basically in a long queue of getting repaired. Um, and so Washington Gas is responsible for maintaining a safe gas system. That is their responsibility as a regulated monopoly in DC. And regular repair is the way that this has been happening the whole time that the gas system has existed. Um, Washington Gas has been responsible for repairing it. In the last just over 10 years, Washington Gas has also started something called accelerated replacement. So, accelerated replacement is not about finding leaks and fixing them. It's about replacing pipes that might leak in the future based off of what they're made of or other predictive models. Basically, Washington Gas is saying it's likely that these pipes are going to leak in the future, and so we need to repair them preemptively. This program is very expensive and it's flawed. There's a lot of issues with it. So I'm going to get into what exactly does this program look like in DC. This program, the Accelerated Pipeline Replacement Program, is called Project Pipes. That has existed since 2014, so they've been going at it for over 10 years. And their most recent proposal to continue the program, they've renamed it District Safe so that it sounds friendly, but we're calling it District Unsafe because, we know that methane gas is not safe for our city. So both of these programs, whether you know it as Project Pipes or you're learning it as District Safe, that is Washington Gas's Accelerated Pipeline Replacement Program. That program is paid through surcharges. And the company makes that money before they ever do the work. So if you ever look at your gas bill, you'll see that there's a little Project Pipes fee on there. Every gas bill you pay, you're paying an extra charge that goes directly to Washington Gas, and they use that money to spend on these projects before they ever actually do them. And then once they've done it, what Project Pipes actually does, like I've said, is replace pipes. So they'll take the pipe that runs between the street where there's a big gas line and your house, where you have all the gas running through your actual house. That's called a service line. They're replacing those service lines. And once they put in a brand new pipe, that pipe is worth more than the old decaying pipe that they took out of the ground. And so they are building more valuable assets for their company. So you can think about this in terms of like if you're buying a house and you're taking out a mortgage, you have to put down a down payment. That's like the surcharge. You're giving a chunk of change up front for them to start the work or for you to buy the house. Then for 30, 40 years, you have a house and you got to pay a mortgage every month. That's kind of like the increases that end up in the regular rates for Project Pipes. It's, you're paying off the value of that pipe over a long period of time. So Project Pipes gets paid for by two ways, and both of those ways make your gas bills more expensive. So what is cumulatively the cost of this program? Well, the first number is $4.5 billion, which is the surcharge cost, basically. That's like the upfront cost that it's going to cost to replace all of the pipes, every single gas pipe we have in the city, getting replaced under Project Pipes. Washington Gas is estimating it's going to take 40 years, and it's going to cost $4.5 billion, billion with a B, which is crazy. But that's not even really actually the full picture. Over those 40 years, if you're looking at not just what's being paid through those surcharges, through those initial costs, but also what's being paid over time as you're, paying off that mortgage, it's $12 billion. So this is meaning DC residents, all of us, are paying $12 billion over the next 40 years for this program. And what does that really translate into? Well, the first two phases of Project Pipes have already happened. This program started in 2014. The first phase of it was about 140 million. The second phase of it, which we're still actively in, took 5 years and was about 200 million. Last year, the Public Service Commission rejected the um, third proposal for Project Pipes. Washington Gas came and basically said, we want to triple the size of this program and more, and do so much more of this replacement with this insane amount of money. And the commission said, okay, that's too much. We don't want to do that. Come back and give us a new version of this. And now they've come back with this new plan, which is called District Unsafe. And that's a program for the next 3 years, and it's for $215 million. So it's still the biggest phase of the program yet. They're trying to act like they're not investing as much because they brought this crazy proposal before, but they are continuing to expand this program more and more and spending more money on it. We're not going to get super into the gas leaks and all of that stuff tonight, but I will say this program has been happening since 2014, and we do not see a reduction in gas leaks, and especially not any sort of change in gas leaks that would match to paying the amount of money that we've already invested in this program. Um, so those first numbers, that 140, 200 million, and then potentially this 215, that's the first way we're paying for Project Pipes. And seeing the question in the chat of how we came up with these numbers. The numbers on each phase, that comes directly from what was approved by the Public Service Commission. The $4.5 billion comes directly from Washington Gas, and the $12 billion comes from a district Department of Energy and Environment study about Project Pipes that figured out what this is going to cost over the lifetime. So there's that first impact, which is the impact of the surcharge, right? But then over the life, we also are going to continue to see increasing bills to cover the life of these pipelines. So right now, Washington Gas is asking to raise their rates by an average of 12% on all customers and up to 17% on residential customers. So if you have gas to heat your home, they want to raise your bill by up to 17% every month, which is absolutely wild. And why do they want to do this? Well, about a quarter of that increase comes from Project Pipes, comes from the investments into the gas system due to Project Pipes. And so Washington Gas is saying, let's increase rates by almost 20% on residential customers. Let's ask people to pay surcharges on every single one of their bills. Meanwhile, 1 in 7 DC gas customers, residential gas customers, people with gas in their homes, are behind on their bills. They're in debt to this investor-owned utility. And hundreds of residents are shut off every single month from their gas because they are so behind on their bills that now they're getting their service cut. So I think we can all agree, for a lot of folks, this is a tough time financially. This information certainly backs that up. Meanwhile, Washington Gas wants to make more money off of us. So that's a great example of this problem of utilities wanting to do these huge investment programs because it helps them to make more money. I want to quickly touch on just one other sort of example of the way utility companies like Washington Gas are trying to make more and more money off of us, which is called decoupling. So that same rate case that I was just talking about, where Washington Gas is asking to raise rates, they're also proposing a decoupling method, which they call a weather normalization adjustment. Decoupling basically means that you, instead of paying for how much gas you use, right now you get a bill and it's like, oh, you turned your heat on in January, so your bill you get in February is more than, your bill you get in July. Rather than doing that, they want to average it out so that you would pay basically the same amount in every single month, and it wouldn't actually be tracked with exactly how much gas you're using. It would be a calculated average. And then if that average doesn't work out to how much you use, then they, charge more, or, in theory, cut you a check and it balances out. But what we actually see with this is that it always leads to higher bills. Places where gas utilities have any kind of decoupling, customers pay higher bills. The simplest reason for that is if you aren't seeing your bills go up because you're using more gas, you're not getting a signal that you're using more gas. And I know many of us, like, November, December comes around, our bills get a little higher because we're turning on our heat. And then we're like, do I really need to heat my house quite that warm? Maybe I'll turn it down a little bit. People can make choices. If you're going through a particularly hard time, you can make choices about how much you use your service. Decoupling takes away your ability to do that, and it makes you less energy efficient because you don't actually know how much energy you're using. Um, and Washington Gas, they know this. They admit this in their application for this rate case and the back and forth testimony about it. They admit that this is about making money. And they know that if this had been in place over the last 5 years, it would have cost customers millions of dollars more. So this is one more example of the way that a utility can use something like a rate case to make money off of folks. And that's kind of a recap of what's happening in the methane gas world. But of course, we also have an electric utility. So I'm going to pass it over to Harrison to talk more about that.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. DC has its own electric utility, which is also structured the same way that Washington Gas is. Um, in the same way that Washington Gas is owned by a larger parent corporation, so is Pepco. Pepco stands for the Potomac Electric Power Company. It is also a shareholder owned model. And so from this graphic, we can get a better understanding of how Pepco operates and how we receive our power as DC residents. So Pepco, they own the lines, the power lines, the substations in the DC service area. They do not generate any of the power. Pepco buys from PJ Interconnection, that's our greater grid, and buys from different power plants that buy into that grid. Pepco is regulated by our Public Service Commission. It's a 3-person board appointed by the mayor. Currently, all 3 members have been appointed by Mayor Bowser. And then Pepco then is also in charge of customer services and essentially billing us that and collecting those bills to send back to Exelon as part of their larger shareholder dividends and their overall financial planning. How Pepco makes money, because they don't generate any of the power themselves, is they charge a fee for delivering this electricity to your doorstep and to your businesses. This is mainly paid through rate increases. Essentially the same model Claire was just talking about. Pepco's guaranteed a rate on equity and a rate of return. So currently the rate of return is about 7.5% for Pepco, and the rate of equity is upwards of 9 to 10%. I believe it's at 9.7. As Kevin touched on earlier, it makes sense on paper that you want to incentivize your monopoly utility, that they will get a profit, so they should continue to give affordable and accessible electricity. However, it really, in the real world, as we've seen, it incentivizes Pepco to build larger, more expensive, and often dirtier infrastructure, and also to buy the cheapest power imaginable from PJM and the greater grid. So these dirty fossil fuel power plants that have been around for decades, so that they can pocket more of that money. So a bit more of the background on the crisis in DC. Because this is a shareholder utility, it is leading to the same financial issues and climate issues that Washington Gas is leading to. So as of December 2024, and for the last 2 years by our counts at We Power DC, it oscillates between 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 DC residents are in utility debt to Pepco. So they are behind on their bills chronically month on month. And just like a credit card and just like bank fees, you get a fee slapped on that accrues interest. And so it keeps a lot of our low income neighbors and communities in perpetual debt to a corporation that's not even based here. By the December 2024 metrics, about 63% of our low income customers are in debt to Pepco. These are numbers that Pepco is required to file at the PSC every month. They run about 20 days behind. So these are very easily accessible, and they can be found on the PSC website in the docket system. While Pepco's keeping a lot of their customers in debt, they're also reporting huge earnings. So in 2023 alone, they reported a $306 million operating profit. That's money that goes straight to their shareholders, many of which do not live in the DC area. And so it hurts a majority of these low income customers by keeping them in perpetual debt while Pepco is continuously buying dirty energy and creating dirty infrastructure. By the last statistic, only about 15% of Pepco's fuel mix came from renewable sources. They've also consistently stood in the way of different renewable energy projects for electrification, like rooftop and community solar in the DC area. So the natural question after this is, what do we do about the energy crisis in DC? I'm going to push it back to Claire to answer that for you.
Yeah, awesome. So obviously this is a really big problem. So there is many different ways that we need to solve it. So the first thing is we need to stop the bad build out of infrastructure that we don't need. So we want to stop project pipes. Like I said, the Washington Gas is asking the Public Service Commission to approve the third phase of this program, and they have announced community hearings in June where DC residents can come and say how they feel about this program. So, the first one is on June 3rd at Anacostia Neighborhood Library at 5:30 p.m. and the second is on June 17th at the Public Service Commission. That one is also at 5:30, and you could also participate online on the one on the 17th. And basically, what a community hearing is the commissioners will be there. They call folks up who have registered, and you have up to 3 minutes to speak about what you think. You definitely don't have to be an expert. It's not about knowing all of the details that we covered in this presentation or anything else. It's just about showing up as a resident and explaining what you want your money to be invested in, what you think our city should be doing with our energy system. And it's really important we take advantage of the opportunities that we have to talk to our regulators. They're difficult for all of the reasons we've talked about tonight, but we want to make sure that when they do take the opportunity to hear from the public, that they are hearing from us. And so if you scan this QR code, you can just hold your phone up to the presentation, or you'll also, of course, get a link to this in your email, and I'll drop some links in the chat as we continue on. But this is a QR code to let CCAN know that you're interested in testifying, so you don't have to 100% commit. But RSVP with us, let us know that you're interested, and we will get in contact with you. We will share a testimony guide, which will give you some facts about District Safe. It'll give you some talking points for your testimony. We'll also connect you with a testimony training that we're going to be doing and opportunities to meet one-on-one with myself, or Isla, who's our DC organizer at CCAN, to ask questions and get one-on-one support writing your testimony. So you're definitely not in it alone. If you've never testified before, we have lots of resources to make it easier. And we'll also walk you through the process of how to get yourself signed up at the commission, which is easy. You just need to send an email. And even if you don't sign up and you show up day of, they'll still let you speak. So if you're interested in testifying at these community hearings, please do let us know so that we can get in touch with you and get you all the resources that you need. I really do encourage folks, if you are thinking about an easy way that you can take action in the next month, this is a really important way to help stop the build out of even more of this methane infrastructure that ultimately, we need to get off of our gas system. We don't need to spend $12 billion on it. So that's the first thing that we need to do, which is stopping the build out of more fossil fuel infrastructure that we don't need. But of course, we also need to think about how are we getting off of that infrastructure. So I'm going to pass it over to Justin.
Thanks. So as Claire was saying, next we need to get off our gas system by electrifying our home gas appliances. So most gas in homes is used for heating, 69% for space heating and 26% for water heating. However, gas heaters are relics of the past. Actually, traditional electric heaters are too. Instead, heat pumps are the future. They're AC but backwards, moving heat from outside instead of generating on the inside. This is very energy efficient, and it can save $500 per year on average for a homeowner. And mini split systems, which are pictured here, are even more efficient for both heating and cooling, and they don't require HVAC ducts. These are standard and cheap in Asia already, though they can be more difficult and expensive to source here. And this is not just for heating your home. Heat pump water heaters also exist, and these also save energy and money. Now, what about gas stoves? Switching from gas stoves won't affect your bills much since they are only 2% of residential usage, but it's still necessary to remove our dependence on gas pipes. Some of you might be dreading saying goodbye to your gas stoves, but thankfully, just like with heat pumps, we have a new player on the block that completely changes electric cooking. So gas companies want us to think that they are still the necessary better option, but they are not. First off, even conventional electric stoves offer many benefits. They can be easier to clean, and compared to gas stoves, they offer many air quality and health benefits, which come to the next event for information on that. Of course, there are still some drawbacks to conventional electric stoves, but it's increasingly clear that a different kind of stove, induction stoves, are the future. These work by using magnets to directly heat the cookware, and this heats even faster than gas stoves and can boil water in half the time. You can change temperature instantly and precisely, which provides more control than even gas stoves. And it can automatically turn off when there is no cookware on it. And there's no excess heat generated because it's all in the cookware. And chefs love these benefits. I've linked an interview below with James Beard Award winner J. Kenji Lopez Alt, where he says induction is just better for nearly all Western cooking. I personally still live in a gas apartment, but I've gotten a portable induction cooktop like the one pictured here. These might not be as good or precise as an actual induction stovetop, but I still find them useful for health, convenience, and power, and it's really nice cooking with them. But that's just on an individual consumer level. And of course, most of us cannot afford to completely electrify our home, especially with landlords involved. So how do we electrify at mass scale? The first step is no new gas installations. A previous ban in Berkeley, California was defeated in court, but a different one recently passed in New York City and has also held up in court earlier as of last month. It's also passed in various countries, including Germany and the Netherlands, which are two countries with high residential gas usage, and many more. But there's still high upfront costs to electrification for existing gas homes. So although manufacturing costs keep going down, Trump's current trade war will increase costs as well. And therefore, funding and support are necessary for electrifying existing homes. One approach is individual heat pump subsidies. In the US, we have currently a heat pump tax credit of 30% up to $2,000 one time for primary homeowners. There were higher grants for lower income households that were passed in the Inflation Reduction Act, but they were never actually rolled out by the Department of Energy under Biden, and now all information on these programs have been wiped from government websites. In DC, we have a heat pump rebate of up to $5,000 and up to $1,600 for heat pump water heaters. However, this seems to end this September and is only for homes with fewer than 4 units, so quadplexes and smaller does not apply to larger apartments. Internationally, in Germany, they have stacking subsidies of up to 70% of the heat pump value and up to 30,000 euros. However, a new conservative government recently took power and these subsidies are under threat. And here in the US, Denver is leading the way for cities with a heat pump rebate in apartments of up to $4,000 and up to $8,000 for commercial heat pump water heaters. Climate vulnerable areas are prioritized with higher rebates, and unlike with many other programs, tenants and owners are both eligible. Denver is also piloting subsidies of $600,000 for each new affordable housing building with heat pumps. This initial pilot program covers 10 new apartment buildings with plans to expand in the future. So most of these programs we just saw still rely on individual consumers, but there are some which seek to make change more broadly. In the UK, which still has a substantial social housing sector, despite significant privatization since the 80s, there is a £1.29 billion initial funding for electrifying council houses from 2025 to 2028. British municipalities and nonprofits that own council houses have already over applied by £1 billion, showing the level of interest that they have in making their social housing green. The Labour Party manifesto additionally commits a total of £13.2 billion up to 2030 for retrofits here. Here in the US, where social housing is much less common and we are facing an even more severe housing crisis, initiatives such as the Green New Deal for social housing are crucial for equitable mass adoption and public control. Locally, efforts are currently being spearheaded by Green New Deal for DC. These better, cleaner, healthier technologies we've talked about cannot remain in the hands of the rich and powerful and must be built into homes for us, for the people. Our dollars should be building the future, a green, affordable, safe future where we have control, not more outdated, expensive, and dangerous gas pipes. Of course, with electrified appliances, we are still relying on our electric utility. So next, Harrison will talk about the future of our electric utility system.
Sure thing. Thanks, Justin. Regarding public power and the future of our power system, it's fairly obvious that while we have two privately owned power providers in gas and electricity, electricity is infinitely easier to decarbonize and make green. How we do that essentially is through the public power model, and that's removing that profit incentive to pay out those shareholders. Public power is prevalent across the US and has a long and storied history in the US. Public power utilities, it refers to public ownership of the grid that distributes it directly to their residents and their businesses. This has been around since the late 1800s. It boomed a lot during the Great Depression, when the profit incentive essentially wasn't there to deliver to rural folks in the South and the Northeast area. So this is what happens when cities or states own their grid and they act as that manager. They're across the US, like I said. They're very prevalent in large cities like Los Angeles, Austin, Omaha, Huntsville, Alabama. So across the political spectrum here, some quick stats and facts about this. Public power serves it's about 55 million Americans. They're prevalent in 2,000 communities. They're in every single state except for Hawaii, including all American territories. And they generate about 10% of electricity and distribute 15%. On average, when comparing public power utilities to their investor and shareholder owned peers and their co-ops, they have the lowest average bills. They are also more reliable, both in bigger cities and in rural areas. Oftentimes, people think that their corporate utilities like Pepco and Dominion give back to communities through sponsorships and charities. That's actually not true. Public power gives 20% more to the communities that they're in, which, makes sense. You're giving back to the community it's your home, right? But public power is essentially, it's founded on a principle that energy is a human right and it's not a commodity to make money off of, which paves a path that it's a lot easier to make long-lasting financial decisions and long-lasting green decisions. Let's dig in a little deeper. So public power has a lot of successes and it's founded on a lot of different principles here. So it's legal to form a municipal utility across the US. A few states have the right to form one or to buy out their investor-owned utility, like in Wisconsin. It benefits the community through a lot of different economic benefits, such as local jobs and stronger unions, as well as guaranteeing lower rates. There's a big push for strong community resolve here. And there's a lot of focus on reliability, green energy, and community control. Some successes that we see on the slide here is the Long Island Power Authority. They're still working to fully manage their utility, but they do own their infrastructure. Winter Park, Florida is a very popular example in the Florida area. Currently, there is a proposal in communities outside of Clearwater, Florida, to ditch Duke Energy, and they point to Winter Park as a really big success, both for lower rates and for cleaner, more reliable energy. Currently, the city of Boulder, they were on a 10-year campaign to replace Xcel Energy, specifically because Xcel wasn't decarbonizing their grid fast enough. And while they weren't able to achieve this, they were successful in pushing both Xcel Energy and the state legislature for much more aggressive climate goals. So these public power campaigns are also used as a crutch and a tool to get that decarbonized goal at the very end of things. Regarding what was posted in the chat about Pepco standing in the way of different solar and renewables projects, Pepco was found in 2021, 2022 to be standing in the way of rooftop solar programs, mainly because it cuts into their bottom line. Pepco is not allowed to generate their own electricity. So when people have those distributed energy resources on their businesses, on their churches, or on their homes, it cuts into their profit margin. How they were doing this is essentially they were lying about the metering of how much energy each person's solar panels were generating. They got slapped with a fine from the DCAG. But this is another example on how a for-profit utility will see a net good of clean energy in the community, and it cuts into their profits. So they lie and get in the way of this.
Okay, awesome. So that is the bulk of our presentation tonight. And now I just want to cover for folks a little bit more about how to learn more and how to get involved with our organizations. So, like I mentioned at the top, this is a three-part series. If you would like to attend our final part, we are hosting it in person on May 22nd. We'll have dinner for folks, and we're going to focus on the health impacts of methane gas in our homes, and how using gas, particularly for cooking and also for heating our homes, contributes to asthma and other really serious health conditions. So if you're interested in learning more and want to join, we would love to see you on May 22nd. And now a little bit more about how to continue to be involved in the work of all of the organizations tonight. Justin.
Thank you. So if you're interested in becoming involved in Sunrise, you can become a Sunrise member in the first link. And if you're interested in becoming involved in Sunrise DC, our local DC hub, please fill out the form in the second link and we'll reach out to you shortly. Yeah, thank you. And next is
I can jump on here. If you want to get involved in We Power DC, we have a wheat pasting event in Noma coming up. Not this weekend in May, but the next weekend in May. We're communicating to the community that there is a public power alternative in the background. We're also finishing up our white paper, which is the legal and political framework for how we achieve a public power utility in DC. This comes through legislation and a feasibility study that shows how it is possible.
Awesome. And if you're interested in getting more involved with CCAN and our work to move the city off of methane gas, you can come to our May DC activist meetup. It's at 7 p.m. On next Thursday, May 13th or May 15th. We will be meeting in person at the MLK Library and would love for you to come, and we'll be talking a lot more about Project Pipes and everything that's going on at the Public Service Commission. Okay, so that is from us. And now we have time to answer folks' questions. I did see one question in the chat from Nathan, which was asking about the backlog of regular gas line repair. and whether or not they're asking to spend money on DC district unsafe while they still have that backlog. So yes, essentially, rather than trying to seek out where gas leaks are, there's something called advanced leak detection, which is a technology. It's a newer technology, but it's other gas utilities use it effectively. That's a technology that helps actually find leaks. And even without even advanced leak detection, Washington Gas still knows where a lot of leaks are. Um, but they want to do accelerated replacement mostly because of that surcharge. So they make extra money on it. And in general, they're replacing the pipes rather than repairing leaks, which is a bigger capital investment. So they're going to make more money off of it, basically. So at CCAN, we're very much advocating, yes, gas leaks need to be repaired while we're using our gas system and transitioning off of it. It needs to be as safe as it can be, which is not entirely safe, but it needs to be as safe as it can be. So we do want to see them repair. And one of the reasons that we don't want District Safe to get approved and Project Pipes to continue is Washington Gas is not focusing on that repair, and like repair leaks are just continuing to prop up. They've done less repair work than ever before because they're prioritizing this replacement work and it isn't actually addressing leaks. Um, because they're worried about making money and not actually addressing gas leaks. Um, okay, if other folks have questions, I would love to hear them. Let me stop sharing my screen so folks can ask. Feel free to drop any questions in the chat, or if you want to come off mute or raise your hand, would be happy to hear any questions that folks have.
I can answer the question about DC Water. DC Water is an independent authority that is a combination of representatives and experts from the district and also Prince George's County and I believe one other county. It is publicly run, so it's not a private company, but it's its own independent authority, meaning that its finances are different from the DC government. However, they still contracts and negotiate a lot with the surrounding counties whenever they need a rate increase or a capital infrastructure program. But there's no profit incentive there, and they don't have a stock that's traded on the New York Stock Exchange. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, go ahead, Nathan.
Yes, thank you for answering my question earlier, Claire. My my question right now is sort of like what is the next step in terms of uh, creating a public utility that would own either our electric grid in DC and or the methane gas system. Um, yeah. Hold on. The other one I was going to say was sort of about I forget the name of the law, but there was a requirement in DC that new buildings be methane gas free in terms of uh, cooking, but also heating and heating systems, and I think also boilers. Is that How does that fit into if it's I think there was a lawsuit about it that might have put a pause on it or pause on implementation, but while it's worked out through the courts. But how does that have an effect on getting DC off of methane gas?
Yeah, let me answer the gas section of that. And then Justin or Harrison, please add in to finish my answer. But yes, so when it comes to our position around the gas utility, we want to stop having methane gas in DC for a bunch of reasons relating to climate and health. And so one of um, you know, it certainly may be possible at some point in the future that, we kind of have this like leftover infrastructure with the methane gas system that the city takes over. Um, Washington Gas as a company could also like do some other type of utility distribution like geothermal. Um, and that could look differently. And then that utility could be taken over by the government or not. But I think the electricity part of it is a little bit more cut and dry when it comes to like public ownership. Whereas the gas system, it's like, well, we want to ultimately wind down those assets. And to the second part of your question, yes, that law you're talking about is the Building Efficiency Performance Standard. And it is a super important law in the city that affects all of our new construction, like you said, so that we're not continuing to build buildings that are part of this gas system. Um, Washington Gas as well. Washington Gas has sued against that law here in DC and in Maryland, and the gas companies are doing this all over the place. Um, and so, exactly what the future of that will be partially up to the courts. It's also partially up to the mayor who wants to pause implementation of Building Efficiency Performance Standard, or BEPS is sometimes called, in our upcoming budget. So, yeah, there's a lot of work to do to defend the progress that we've already made on moving away from gas. Um, and that's just sort of the one piece about moving away from gas. But yeah, other thoughts on that, Justin or Harrison?
I mean, yeah, just I think the gas ban in DC is currently set to start in 2027, but we will need to see how it fares in the courts, and of course, the Congress as well. But yeah.
In terms of municipalizing our utilities, be it gas, but mainly electricity, is mainly through the framework of legislation and a feasibility study. What that means is the council needs to pass funding for what is called the feasibility study to create a framework and a pathway on the best way to municipalize our system. So what that means is they set aside X amount of money and hire experts to look at the system to say, hey, we should buy these assets. We can build these other assets for cheaper. We can repurpose these lines here. And it would essentially be a buyout from Pepco or a negotiation to spin down certain substations, X, Y, and Z. There are a number of different companies that specialize in this. These are the same companies that do like rate loads and financial accounting specifically for utilities. Baker Tilly Utility Financial Solutions are just a few that come off the dome. But for the last 20 years, that is the process that we've seen in the industry for switching over from shareholder owned to city owned.
Thank you. I guess the point I made about the public ownership of Washington Gas is that, and I think this is a national DSA priority, or the like Green New Deal coalition within DSA, is that when you nationalize like fossil fuel utilities, it's much easier to wind down the use and the exploration and the uh, uh, whatever the term that's not coming to me, of actually taking it out of the ground or from a landfill, what have you, um, is that, like you just, I think Claire mentioned this, is that Washington Gas is one of the entities that's suing DC again about this law that's trying to wind down our dependence on methane. And so I guess I got confused. So it sounds like We Power DC's plan is really just for Pepco. Is that correct? Okay, cool. All right, thank you. Oh, never mind. It's for a different time.
If you're interested on more information of winding down gas utilities in action, the state of Massachusetts is going through a long process of winding down their gas utilities. So it differs between fully winding down those for-profit gas utilities, as part of their strategy. And another part of the strategy is repurposing some of their infrastructure for geothermal or other infrastructure that can support their heat pumps. Their statewide Public Service Commission is currently rolling out a multi-decade plan for that. So that's another example of what you can look at for winding down gas.
Cool. Thanks again.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, any last questions from anyone tonight? Okay, great. Well, thanks so much for joining. I hope you all learned a little bit more about how utilities actually work here in DC and the connection between what you pay every month and what happens in the city's infrastructure. I posted lots of things in the chat for everything that we covered on the slides, and if folks do want to get involved with any of our organizations, we would love to have you. I really hope to see folks at community hearings this June and at our last session of the series on May 22nd. Thanks again for joining, and we'll follow up with you on email with all of this information so that you can find it easily. Have a great night, everybody.